Good afternoon. My name is Bruce Johnson, and I run the security solutions team here at TekStream Solutions. If you haven't heard of TekStream, we're a kind of mid-sized, I guess, specialized services, solutions, and sourcing company. And we focus on a variety of technologies, but most notably in this context, Splunk. And I'm going to speak today at a high level, specifically about our MDR solution in the context of SLED, that is to say, state, local, and education entities. We have some unique solutions in that context, and I'll go over at a very, very high level what they look like and kind of how they fit in the marketplace. The agenda is we're going to start with a little precursor in terms of the MDR landscape, which you're no doubt familiar with, a few ways that we are working to improve MDR solutions, applying our MDR metrics, if you will, to improvement or maturity. And then I'll talk a little bit about the specifics of our MDR solution, a few customer use cases, and then some differentiators at the end. In general, when we look at the marketplace, we all know that attack volume is increasing and a variety of different technologies that are being brought to bear. Most recently, things like AI and ChatGPT. All of these tools and environments and hacking resources are making threats more dynamic and harder to detect. And what we are aimed at is leveraging Splunk technologies as well as our experience to keep you safe, to fend off those attacks. Specifically in the context of the SLED environment, there are a variety of challenges that are shared, but some that are very unique to the SLED customers that we have. Tightening budgets is nothing that is different for SLED, but certainly funding mechanisms are different, and different agencies that we work with or institutions have different profit models and different funding sources that we have to be cognizant of, that we have to be flexible to adapt to. There are complex security frameworks in these environments, or a variety of different agencies that shared agencies or state and governing agencies that our customers have to be accountable to. So there's a lot of shared inter-agency responsibilities, as well as reporting and governance responsibilities, citizen demands, privacy demands, and federally mandated compliance frameworks, in some cases hierarchical frameworks, that have some relatively sophisticated alerting and reporting models, not to mention intelligence sharing across entities. There's a wide disparity of large and small entities in this environment. So the ability to extend a best of breed MDR solution across a variety of different agencies with different budgets, with different degrees of complexity and sophistication in a security context is a lot of what we focus on here. And I'll jump into that. I'll dive into what the solution looks like in that context. There's obviously a need to, when we are talking about multi-agency or SLED-focused solutions, there is a need to balance excellence in productivity and cost management with an excellence in paranoia, is what I term it, is the ability to balance the quality of our alerting and incident response and threat mitigation with the need for greater productivity and cost controls. And obviously, there are broader implications for specifically in SLED for the community at large, as well as a rapidly evolving security threats, which is certainly not unique to SLED. We are leveraging the Splunk platform. Everyone pretty much knows Splunk as a superior data platform, but many of the older proprietary MDR solutions really use Splunk as a uber-grep, as a database. Basically, they focus on that capability of Splunk to the detriment of the other layers that Splunk has spent the past 10 years developing on top of that data platform, to include analytics, SOAR, automation and orchestration, intelligence management, and threat research. So all of those layers that are pretty critical for an MDR solution, in many cases by our competitors, are basically bringing in third-party tools or augmenting it with proprietary threat graphing or security approaches. and kind of ignoring all of those extra layers for Splunk. So for us, we leverage the Splunk tools. As you can see here, we're leveraging really all of the capability of Splunk as kind of a leading SIEM and SOAR provider in the industry, and we're making sure that the investment that our customers make in the technology transcends the investment they make in our services, so that there's continuity of that investment regardless of whether we're involved or not, which we feel is certainly a differentiator and indicative of the fact that we have a more modern MDR approach, if you will. We have a lot of add-ons to Splunk. I should say to our core incident response solution, to include compliance solutions, fraud analytics, incident investigations, IoT, advanced, insider threat detection. All those are kind of add-ons, which maybe I can go into a little bit longer, a little bit later in our presentation. But the core of what I am really talking about or focused on in this discussion is our incident response platform specifically. We have kind of three main measures for measuring MDR effectiveness, and it holds up pretty well. It's relatively simple: visibility, fidelity, and automation, VFA for short. In the context of visibility, that is the one category that is a little challenging or subjective to measure. Visibility includes, the coverage for MITRE ATT&CK, which is now an integral part of Splunk security solutions or SIEM solutions. The coverage model from data availability, so what is visible from the data sources that we've onboarded and what is dark within an environment, external sources, threat list providers, use cases. Visibility is a very broad topic that includes a number of measures. Fidelity is relatively straightforward in contrast. It is the degree of false positives that we have within an environment. We haven't been able to engineer it so that there are none, but we have techniques that dramatically reduce the number of false positives by leveraging things like decent threat list sources, risk scoring, particularly cumulative risk scoring in the context of enterprise security and RBA, as well as automation within our playbooks. We're trying to produce, improve fidelity consistently. And then automation, obviously, is the degree to which a person is involved with mitigating a threat. And we always, in our experience, want to have people involved with deep security expertise to assess a threat. And what we are seeking to do is automate the mundane, automate, the SA1, security analyst 1 level tasks, in order to, keep them focused on providing security expertise, which is actually kind of the layer on top of that, which is making sure that we are bringing our expertise to bear in incident response, and we're not asking our security analysts, or yours for that matter, to do very mundane types of activities. So we basically take what is a very unstructured series of sources. We put them through our lens of keeping with our Pink Floyd theme, if you haven't noticed. We basically put together 100% onshore 24/7 domestic SOC, and our expertise, as well as kind of our deep Splunk credentials, and we basically look at what comes out the other end and measure each one of those dimensions, if you will, on a regular basis. So when we look at environments, and I will say that the majority of environments that we are dealing with, I'll get into some of the services and solutions that we have to in a second, but the majority of environments that we deal with are typically coming to us from other SIEM environments at this point, given the maturity of the market, or other MDR providers. And we see consistently in each of these categories a relative immaturity, whether it's because of a lack of technology expertise or just a lack of focus, and just not enough hands to be able to retain or leverage deep security expertise. These are the kinds of characteristics that we see on these measures that would indicate room for improvement. So anyone that's bought a SIEM knows that the SIEM, it was justified based on having one pane of glass. and the ability to pull together alerts from every source. So a security professional didn't have to go to a firewall or an EDR provider in order to understand the context of any given threat. All of it was applied in one place. And if you've got a SIM and you're still going to 5 different sources to investigate a threat, then you're maybe not using it to its best advantage. So the other characteristics there are simple echoing of alerts. So if you've got a SIM solution that isn't providing, or a source solution that isn't providing context or enriching events, when you have a simple alert, let's say from an EDR provider that's just echoed back to you with the same alert 4 hours later, then perhaps you're not using it to its best advantage. So fidelity is the same thing, easy to measure, noisy alerting and alert fatigue. Automation, mundane tasks, as I mentioned before, and getting kind of very little collaboration, if you will, within the context of your own automation. And then, just the guidance aspect that has really an effect on all 3 of these, which has to do with effectiveness and cost and productivity and speed to implementation, as well as some of the other challenges that we see from other MDR providers with things like offshore resources. We did start our MDR practice relying on offshore resources, but we found it harder to control. And in particular, if when we had a partner involved, we didn't feel as, secure with the scenario where one of their employees was responsible for a breach and they were not. Our recourses were very limited in what we could do with an offshore resource. So today our SOC is 24/7 domestic with TekStream badged employees, if you will. So a lot of measurement in that context, visibility. When we look at, again, using Pink Floyd analogies, when we look at an existing environment, we're looking for the ability to respond to constantly evolving use cases, adopt new threat lists, and integrate new appliances, because there are innovations every day. Our focus seems to be really burgeoning on ChatGPT, not just for well-formatted phishing grammar, but really ChatGPT task bots and generated threats, which are making it challenging for us going forward. So certainly our eye on the ball for that technology. Enriched alerts from all tiers, adoption of advanced security concepts like proactive or zero-day security approaches. So from a visibility perspective, that's our focus. Fidelity, obviously, not to be too redundant, reducing noise with different algorithms. It seems that there is a life cycle for a correlation search or a search within Splunk to identify outliers. And those algorithms may start as a static search or change to a statistics-based search with standard deviations, or then use machine learning algorithms and more sophisticated algorithms to again reduce noise and distractions. Risk-based scoring, cumulative risk-based scoring with RBA, a very common technique that is very inadequately applied across most of the customer base, with accurate dynamic risk weighting, providing deeper algorithms and improved kind of escalation parameters, if you will, making sure there's some consistency in severity and priority. In the context of automation, and obviously, are we using the right channels to communicate? There are a series of kind of categories for escalation that we need to manage across the appropriate channels for our customers. We are highly collaborative and highly automated, and part of that automation is grabbing the metrics that are appropriate for any given playbook or workbook to make sure that that we're tracking not only in terms of our SLAs, but in terms of productivity, as well as the accuracy of our dispositions. So something that we're tracking constantly. And then obviously for us, leading edge security consulting with our Splunk expertise is certainly a differentiator. We have twice the certifications of the next partner. And we started as a consulting agency or consulting entity in the Splunk world, where all of us had to be fully certified. And so we kind of started with the expectation that we had deep expertise in the technology and layered on security expertise. So that's kind of our pedigree, is approaching the MDR solution from a consulting perspective. So we're up to date on the latest and greatest that Splunk has to offer, as well as our own kind of algorithms and searches that we layer in. We have in Splunk Security Essentials, you'll see that there's a kind of out of the box library of around 1,500 searches. We layer in another 600 or so. And the trick is to go through all of those provided searches and really zero in on what is important and relevant to your specific threat surface, your environment. Some people are more interested in LDAP types of attacks, others in cloud attacks, and we want to drill down on really what's applicable and customize a solution that keeps you safe and prioritizes the security threats that you feel are top of mind. Full support for modeling everything in Splunk, improved accuracy and visibility. I think that the important thing to note with these measures, visibility, fidelity, automation, is that they're constantly expanding. We are constantly adding new use cases. We're constantly improving our fidelity, and we're constantly improving automation. So we have an approach that every quarter revisiting these metrics to make sure that we have goals that track with your stakeholders in security to make sure that we're making progress against all of those measures, whether or not your number ever goes up, because they're, as I said, ever expanding targets in those categories. So specifically our MDR solution, let me talk a little bit about what we provide. We are Splunk experts. We provide support for the entire life cycle of ownership of Splunk, if you will. What that means is that we can provide the software. We have creative financing options, and we can do bundling and selling of the software that is relatively unique and flexible in that context. As a Splunk partner and reseller, we find ourselves, bundling the software in with our solutions, even in a direct arrangement. Services we do, obviously, consulting is where we started, and we have a variety of different services that I'll speak about that are specific to improving SIEM SOAR environments or doing cloud migrations. Our first cloud migration to Splunk Cloud was, I think, probably 4 years ago. We've been doing them consistently ever since. So if that's something you're interested in, it's not something that I'm going to go into here, but certainly that is an expertise that we're one of 4 right now partners that are directly focused on the PP2C program, which is Splunk's acronym around their cloud migration solution. So, and we're obviously a lead Splunk partner. In terms of solutions, we do obviously manage security services. We do 24/7 MDR, collaborative SOC enablement. We stress collaborative, and I'll go into that. We do managed services for a variety of large customers, so that they have kind of unique, let's say, cloud or on-prem requirements or expertise, and we manage that environment for them on an ongoing basis to bring to bear our expertise. We have other business units, as you see on the bottom there, cloud-focused, AWS and Google. For instance, we have an entire business unit dedicated to cloud solutions, another one to Oracle and so forth. We collaborate heavily with those teams as it's needed and appropriate. We obviously do patch and vulnerability management and Splunk application support. So ongoing kind of support services, as you will, on a retainer basis, apart from just managed security services or MDR. And then sourcing is kind of unique to us as well. If you need expertise, we have a sourcing arm at TekStream that allows us to find technology professionals in a variety of different categories, not just Splunk, but it does help to really augment, if you will, our overall solutions, because we can then help you to own Splunk no matter what your challenges are, whether it's finding expertise or whether it's retaining services to stand up the environment, whether it's putting together the deal with the software included, or whether it's a solution for MDR in this context. So that's kind of what we do for a living. This is our, our truncated, if you will, list of customers, NASCAR slide. Some of them you will recognize, and obviously any size customer for us, we can handle a wide variety of customers, big and small. So let me talk a little bit about our services and our solutions that are a subset of them, the ones that are relevant for this discussion. So one of them is SIEM and SOAR remediation. In this case, we're looking at SIEM. There are a lot of kind of characteristics that you can see for a stale SIM environment that are tells for us when we get involved with a customer that has something like enterprise security, Splunk enterprise security, and is not maintaining it adequately. So not necessarily adopting use cases. They're going to multiple tools, as I mentioned earlier. In other words, they're going to the firewall, they're going to EDRs because they don't have the appropriate context in their enterprise security environment. They're not leveraging risk-based alerting so that their volume is relatively high, and they've got a lot of noise for relatively granular notable events, Splunk parlance for a security event. And so that's the types of things that we bring to bear to buff, if you will, a stale SIM environment. And it's similar for SOAR. In many cases, we get involved just to really help to develop templates based on some of the templates that we have here, as well as, we find a variety of operational playbooks that aren't just security related, maybe tangentially related to security for things like approvals and provisioning. So, we have kind of a formulaic approach to developing playbooks that has been proven out and is a part of every MDR implementation. In terms of solutions then, we have, as I mentioned before, the MDR platform, SOC as a service to outsource SOCs, leveraging both SIM and SOAR. So all of our solutions leverage both of those. Our security analysts are working off of the SOAR platform to remediate alerts, and then we're round tripping back to the SIM platform to close off disposition. We're leveraging tiers 1 through 4 of the domestic SOC, and we have kind of a structured, obviously, SA1, SA2, SA3, an engineering escalation path, leveraging Ops Genie at this point to do kind of the call tree and notification, wake people up out of bed if there needs to be an escalation. We're co-managing the environment so that we leverage kind of the licenses that are customer specific, and we layer in our technology or solution on top of that, again, leveraging Splunk directly. So one thing that is very different about us is that we take a consulting approach, so we're not as, let's say, IP focused, I guess, as other MDR providers. Again, leveraging a non-proprietary approach, if you want to think of leveraging Splunk technology directly instead of our own kind of add-ons. We also have kind of this idea of the collaborative platform, and I'll talk a little bit about that with some of our solutions. We have actually shared incident response where the customer will bring employees to provide expertise or to collaborate along with us in terms of providing security analysis and taking some of the tickets in Splunk SOAR working side by side. And I'll go through some examples of that. So in the context of collaborative SOC enablement, one of the solutions that we have that's a little bit different is kind of establishing a customer's own multi-tenant SOC, if you will. So as I said before, we're kind of focused on establishing this MDR platform as an outgrowth of our consulting expertise. So in some cases, we're working with customers to establish their own dedicated multi-tenant SOC, JSOC, and establishing the platform on their behalf to be able to do what we do. So that's kind of the intent here, and in this case, an emphasis on driving down costs through sharing the responsibility for MDR services, and maybe leveraging us for the hours that everybody hates for tier 1, like nights and weekends and holidays, and taking day shifts. So again, very collaborative. From an architecture perspective, layers perspective, our solution goes on top of kind of all of the tiers of an appliance that's inherent in your security surface or your security architecture, I should say, and layers on enterprise kinds of technologies like EDR, vulnerability, authentication, threat intel, specifically on top of that with Splunk SIM and SOAR, and then 24/7 staffing. Our process is not terribly different from MDR providers that are leveraging a SIM and SOAR. it's perhaps worthwhile noting that this this respond or report diamond is not a mutually exclusive branch. In other words, we have several customers that lean more heavily towards case management, integrating our incident response into cases within an appropriate case management solution, like ServiceNow or Jira, or incident response to automate the interaction with the endpoints, to block URLs, to purge email addresses, et cetera. So that's not a mutually exclusive path. We can do both. For instance, if we see an inappropriately handled network threat, we can mitigate by blocking our URL or an IP, as well as creating a case for the NOC to be able to go back and change some of the rules that maybe were inefficiently applied. This is kind of our process model. The important thing to note here is that our processes feed into one another in a closed loop operation. So we have, like any SOC, those things that are important in seconds, right? Ingesting the data so that there's not a great deal of lag in the environment, because there's a certain amount of a gap between when an event is generated and when it's ingested. Very important that we minimize that if we can. Detecting and predicting as quickly as we can, meaning really focusing on outliers, ringing the bell when it's really important, automating incident response, and collaborating in that context with our customer. The collaboration might take the form of simply escalations that need customer attention, or there might be static approvals. For instance, if we're purging over a certain threshold in the terms of the number of emails, we're going to need approval, and that's part of the process that we have, let's say, in our phishing workbook, in order to regularly collaborate on incident response. Longer running processes, obviously deeper investigations, managing the cases and reporting on those cases. We meet weekly with our customers. We have a project manager on every MDR endeavor, and we go over in that meeting typically operational metrics, SLAs, performance metrics, efficiencies, as well as any of the cases that we have. So we're constantly managing in our Jira environment any of the backlog of improvements that need to be made, or new data sources, or fidelity tuning, et cetera. We're constantly improving the environment in almost like a Kaizen approach, with incremental improvements that we are tracking in cases, and you as a customer are helping us to establish priority for those ongoing improvements. So that's kind of what we look at and report on a weekly basis. Then on a quarterly basis, we're assessing, tuning, and enhancing. We're doing a quarterly security assessment, looking at those high-level metrics, looking at the performance expectations. Are we meeting our SLAs operationally, but also are we improving along those dimensions of visibility, fidelity, and automation the way that we are expecting to? And then we're setting goals for the next quarter for improvements. All of that is feeding back then into the operational execution. So that's kind of our closed loop operations. And then we have a variety of kind of supporting services that augment the core incident response, to include things like fraud or admin, MSP, so we're hosting the environment, additional support, vulnerability testing, compliance, et cetera. This is at our simplest level, of most common, if you will, MDR architecture for us. Obviously, it starts in the customer environment. So your environment, where you have a variety of different security appliances and tiers with firewalls, EDR, cloud, et cetera, that is using Splunk agents. Splunk is an agent-based solution, listening to typically parsing log files, taking files from either directly from applications or through an intermediary like syslog of some sort, and sending those logs, or listening to a protocol for that matter, sending those logs up into the Splunk cloud. Most typically a Splunk cloud environment, could be on-prem, but a dedicated customer environment with the Splunk SIM. This is kind of represented by indexing and searching. Can be very, very large environments. That's just an abstraction. And then that data is being mined into our SOAR environment, which is a hosted environment on AWS. It's established by our AWS team with a variety of different, WAF, firewalls between instances, and a variety of rules, no external IP, just completely locked down to the environment. And then it goes from that environment, that SOAR environment, into back into the customer environment with a piece called Automation Broker, which is constantly polling for SOAR resolution, from a playbook perspective, constantly pulling to affect that last mile, if you will, to close off firewall ports, IP addresses, URLs, quarantine device, change file reputation, et cetera, or change IAMs in the cloud. So that is kind of our round trip. We detect, we onboard all of the data, we detect anomalies, we automate incident response to those anomalies, and then we affect a change if it's needed directly in the environment. It kind of marries together what is an ad hoc SIEM environment that is shared. So you're hunting along with us, you're creating searches, we're collaboratively working in this environment to the extent that we are not adding too much overhead or resource constraints to that environment. Obviously, we're managing it in terms of what we are actually picking up into SOAR. Our analysts live in the SOAR environment, and then we're remediating those events back in your environment, back in your actual infrastructure. And that's the simplest. One permutation that we have in that kind of MDR architecture is the multi-agency solution, particularly applicable in a SLED solution environment. So in this case, every agency, again, gets their independent Splunk enterprise security environment, typically hosted in Splunk Cloud. So each agency gets a stack. There's an ability to then collectively purchase those stacks, if you will, that Splunk Cloud investment under a volume agreement with a service agency that is responsible for providing SOC services to all agencies within their purview. And there can be tens to hundreds of agencies under that umbrella, all taking advantage of volume purchasing in a Splunk agreement, which the idea here in a multi-agency solution, obviously for any of these shared services agencies, is get to some purchasing power, some economies of scale to drive down the overall cost, and allowing the agency to extend what is a top tier solution to small and large agencies and agencies that would not necessarily be able to afford that top tier solution on their own. So that's the idea with the multi-agency MDR architecture and the problem we're trying to solve there. It still follows the model where each agency gets a dedicated Splunk Cloud environment, has the ability to hunt and search and pivot for any incident, any anomaly, and then a shared kind of multi-tenant, in most cases, SOAR solution that brings back each of those SIEM environments into an automated SOAR environment to implement incident response in an automated fashion. So each agency then emphasizes kind of their own environment combined with standardized playbooks, standardized templates for incident response. There's obviously a big emphasis on the governance model here. There's also a big emphasis on a standardized factory approach that is driven by the sponsoring agency for that JSOC to drive through templates, as well as to do things like shared IOCs and blacklists, threat list intelligence across all of those agencies with feedback mechanisms to the IOCs that are being seen. So I know that's a lot, but there are also even permutations on that, which is what we would call kind of a multi-agency hybrid architecture. And I apologize for the eye chart here. Hybrid, somewhat of an amorphous term. In this case, by hybrid, we mean a collection of small and larger institutions in the context of our multi-agency solution. And the difference is largely for the smaller agencies where we host Splunk environments dedicated to that Splunk agency specifically, but much, much smaller than, let's say, a Splunk Cloud instance. And we provide managed services against that environment in our own AWS, dedicated AWS. But we are able to kind of maintain the ability for customers to directly access Splunk on side by side and collaboratively with TekStream security team, while basically not having to invest in the administration of an on-prem Splunk environment. So that's the difference here. We also then differentiate the playbooks for those InfoSec environments. The smaller SIM for Splunk is called InfoSec. It's free, basically, as opposed to the enterprise security environment, which is a paid-for solution with much greater capability, but it's really designed for 50 gigs and above, relatively large customers. Some of the features is same as the standard kind of multi-agency solution. We're leveraging the MDR application, in this case, a little bit more heavily. I go back a slide. That's this box to the right. This MDR application allows us to push off in real time searches from a shared environment dynamically into any of the Splunk cloud or on-prem hosted environments. We also bringing that solution to bear in pretty much all of our solutions at this point and across our ecosystem. It basically allows us to propagate searches in real time across all of our environments, so that if we see a log for J threat, we can push out in real time a search that gathers telemetry from those environments, and then allows us to follow up with a mitigation search, a correlation search that picks up on those across all of our environments in real time. So somewhat of a different approach. It also allows us to gather metrics across our broad ecosystem to gather effectiveness and usage patterns from the searches that are implemented. As I mentioned before, kind of multi-tenant SOAR environments, but categorized by whether they're InfoSec small focused versus enterprise security focused. And then obviously and all the rest of it in terms of enterprise security and dedicated stacks for SIEM is the same. So let me talk a few case studies, particularly since I just talked about kind of the multi-agency solution. LSU is one of those JSOCs that are innovating in this context. If you see them there at .conf with a presentation, I believe, this year in 2023. And they basically have extended their solution, their multi-agency solution, not only to all of kind of the higher ed institutions within Louisiana, but they're also innovating in a way to bring on student security analysts to participate in incident response. What that does for them is it dramatically drives down the cost of an MDR solution, because they're interacting with taking tickets on a prorated basis, taking tickets off our hands, so that during certain hours, the student analysts are looking at certain playbooks that they're qualified for, and basically closing them. The program extends across the JSOC, and there are kind of multiple JSOCs in the context of the LSU solution, and it's kind of selectively allowing qualified student employees to take on incidents for triage in the context of SOAR. So basically, it allows not only for them to defray costs, but then to further the student careers, right, in the context of cybersecurity and gaining some real world experience. So it facilitates the transition from student to cybersecurity professional, and it allows us to do extensive training and mentoring in a real world environment, and it kind of jumpstarts their career, as well as providing new innovation in the context of our cybersecurity solution. So really innovative solution that we're working with them on and rolling out to all of their institutions over the next few months. There's a major restaurant chain that we've worked with for 10 years, I guess, 10 or 11 years, and more recently focused on the services around remediating their enterprise security environment, which had grown a little bit stale, and we kind of buffed their usage of the SIEM in the context of the enterprise security remediation service with really, really great results. It went from a tool that was not being used to something that is now very consistently a part of their security infrastructure and a source for their own SOAR playbooks to remediate events from across the enterprise. Mainline Health Systems, another example of someone that came to us from another MDR provider with challenges relative to Splunk technology. And it's interesting that if you don't really understand how to leverage Splunk and your data is not coming in appropriately, it's very hard to make accurate decisions off of. It's trite to say garbage in, garbage out, but in the context of security, having adequate visibility to security sources is absolutely integral to making good decisions. And that was the case in this environment. We actually came in, at a much lower cost than their prior solution, and provided a great deal more value, I suppose, than what they were experiencing. Vulcan Materials, another one, smaller institution, but again, we were able to come in at 50% of the cost of their prior solution, and leveraged their existing investments to build out an effective solution, or rebuild, if you will, an effective solution. I'll wrap with this. We have kind of a few key differentiators, not to be redundant, but we're Splunk only, full stack. Obviously, we have a variety of different partners, whether it's EDR providers or vulnerability providers, but Splunk is at the core. Our bench strength is kind of pretty deep in terms of Splunk expertise. We are also outsourcing a variety of different internal Splunk processes, if you will. The on-demand service, we're staffing that, and we're providing Splunk consulting as badged Splunk consultants. Again, 100% onshore. And I guess we haven't been too shy about showing our awards. 2022 Cloud Partner of the Year, 2021 Global and Domestic Professional Services Partner of the Year. And our pricing model is a little bit different in that it doesn't necessarily track with the ingestion volumes. So just because you're expanding your ingestion volumes, you're not necessarily experiencing a repricing event with our MDR solution. We price based on the amount of work that we have to do to keep you safe. So in terms of our process, our focus on implementation, is kind of a very formulaic model. We've done this enough that we have a really good idea of how to onboard a solution for Splunk. In particular, what's different for us is that 90-day incubation period. Our metrics really on number of false positives and the accuracy of remediation are something that we feel that really shake out as we get to know your environment, understand your critical assets, what is likely to be a phishing event, who are your major vendors and partners. There's a lot of learning that we do in that first 90-day period. And again, that first QSA is that first quarterly security assessment, where we look at VFA, is absolutely critical to establishing a baseline. And then we're off to the races after that with an ongoing MDR program. And I apologize, this number is actually 98%. So I will get tagged on that. We have a 98% renewal rate, largely I think because of the collaborative nature of our services and how we work with our customers to provide a quality result. That is the end of this of the presentation for today. If you want to follow up, here's our phone number. Look at our website for all of relevant solutions. One thing I didn't go too deeply in is compliance. It just occurred to me there's more on CMMC and NIST and compliance solutions in that context. But thank you for your time today, and please reach out to us if you have anything you need to follow up on.